The resignation letter was already written. I just hadn't decided if I was going to send it. It was a Tuesday morning, 7:12 a.m., and I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of a building I'd helped build from the ground up, not literally, but close enough. 17 years. I'd been with Meridian Logistics Solutions for 17 years, and I was sitting in a cold car in a concrete garage trying to talk myself into walking through those doors one more time. I didn't walk in for another 22 minutes. I want to give you some context because this story doesn't make sense without it. My name is Owen. I'm 51 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have worked in supply chain operations. Not the glamorous end of business, not finance, not sales, not the people who show up to conferences and give keynotes. The invisible end, the end that makes sure the right product gets to the right place at the right time. And when something goes wrong, it's my phone that rings at 3 a.m. I built my career on being the person you call when it's already bad and you need it to stop getting worse. I joined Meridian when it was 43 employees and one regional warehouse outside of Columbus, Ohio. The owner, a man I'll call my boss, though that word feels too small for what he was to me at the time, had a vision for expanding into a full third-party logistics provider covering the Midwest. He was charismatic, sharp, the kind of person who made you feel like you were part of something real. I believed in what he was building. I turned down a better-paying offer from a competitor in Atlanta to stay. My wife thought I was crazy. She wasn't wrong, but I also wasn't wrong. We grew. Within 8 years, Meridian had 12 warehouses, over 400 employees, and contracts with some of the largest retail distributors in the country. A lot of that was my boss's vision. A fair amount of it was my execution. I was VP of Operations by year 9. I ran a team of 31 people. I knew every client by name, knew their pain points, knew which account managers were solid and which ones were winging it. I knew the company the way you know a house you've lived in for years, where the pipes creak, which door sticks in the summer, where to walk when you don't want to wake anyone up. Then his son-in-law joined the company. My boss had one daughter. She was smart, funny, had nothing to do with logistics. She'd built a small interior design business and was doing well for herself. She met a man named, and I'll use his first name because it matters to nothing. She met a man, they got married, and about 18 months into the marriage, my boss offered him a position at Meridian. That's not unusual. Family businesses do that. I wasn't worried. The son-in-law came in as a senior operations analyst, which honestly was already generous. His background was in commercial real estate. He had no logistics experience, no supply chain background, nothing that translated directly to what we did. But he was smart in the way people who haven't failed enough yet are smart, confident, quick with numbers, good in meetings. My boss liked having him around. That part I understood. What I didn't understand was how fast it all moved. Within 6 months, the son-in-law was sitting in on my team's planning calls. That was fine. My boss framed it as learning the operation. Within 9 months, he was being CC'd on client communications that had previously only gone through me. I noticed. I didn't say anything. Within 11 months, my boss pulled me aside before a quarterly review and told me he was thinking about reorganizing the leadership structure. He said it was about scalability. He said it was about bringing in fresh perspective. I asked him directly what that meant for my role. He put his hand on my shoulder. He was always doing that, the shoulder thing. And he said, "Owen, you are the backbone of this company. Nothing changes for you." I believed him. That was my mistake, and I've had a long time to sit with it. At month 13, the son-in-law was named Chief Operating Officer. I found out in a company-wide email. Not a conversation, not a heads up, not a "hey, I need to talk to you first." An email sent at 8:47 a.m. on a Thursday to all 400-plus employees and every client contact in our system. The subject line was something like, "Exciting leadership news at Meridian." I read it twice. My name was in the second paragraph, not as the new COO, but as a valued senior leader who would be supporting the transition. Supporting the transition. I had been the de facto COO for 6 years. I had never been given the title because my boss always said titles mattered less than impact. I had believed that too. My phone started ringing within minutes. Team members, clients. One of our longest tenured account managers, a woman who'd been with us almost as long as I had, called and said nothing for a moment and then said, "I don't understand this." I told her I'd get back to her. I didn't know what else to say. I walked down to my boss's office. His assistant, a young woman who'd seen everything and said nothing for years, looked at me when I came in and did not look surprised. She told me he was in a call. I sat down in one of the chairs across from her desk and I waited for 40 minutes. When he finally came out, he seemed surprised to see me, or he acted surprised. I still don't know. He invited me in. He closed the door. He said he hoped I understood that this was about the future of the company, about long-term succession planning, about making sure the company could grow beyond any one person. He said it in the careful, practiced way you say something when you've rehearsed it for a conversation you knew was coming. I asked him why he hadn't told me beforehand. He said he'd been afraid of how I'd react. 17 years, and he was afraid of how I'd react. 17 years, and he was afraid of how I'd react. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I sat there and I said very calmly that I needed a few days to think about what my future at Meridian looked like. He nodded. He said he understood. He said, and I will never forget this. He said, "You're irreplaceable, Owen. The company can't function without you." I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about it through dinner, which I could barely eat. My wife kept looking at me across the table, and she knew something was wrong. And she waited until our kids had gone to their rooms before she asked. I told her everything. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know yet. She said, "Yes, you do." She was right. I did know. I'd known sitting in his office. I'd known reading that email. I'd probably known somewhere in the back of my mind for months, watching pieces of my work quietly migrate to someone else's portfolio, watching my name get smaller in the organizational chart, watching my boss look at his son-in-law the way people look at someone they've already decided the future belongs to. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. I went back to work the next Monday, and the Monday after that. I told myself I was gathering my thoughts, being professional, not making any decisions in anger. That was partially true. The other part of the truth is that I had a daughter starting her junior year of college, a mortgage on a house I loved, and 17 years of identity wrapped up in a company that had just made clear how it saw me. Walking away was terrifying, but watching what happened over the next 3 months made it easier. The son-in-law had ideas. He was full of ideas. To be fair to him, and I'm trying to be fair, some of them weren't bad. He wanted to modernize our client portal, push harder into same-day regional delivery, renegotiate some of our carrier contracts. These were reasonable things. What he didn't have was the operational knowledge to execute them without breaking things in the process. He changed our warehouse scheduling software rollout timeline and didn't loop in the IT team until 2 weeks before the go-live date. I found out because the IT lead, a guy who'd worked with me for 9 years, came to my office looking like he hadn't slept and said he needed my help. I helped. We fixed it. The son-in-law got the credit for a smooth rollout. He renegotiated a carrier contract with one of our trucking partners and got better per-mile rates, which looked good on paper, but the terms he agreed to reduced our flexibility during peak season windows. I saw the contract. I flagged it quietly to my boss. My boss said the son-in-law had reviewed it with their attorney and it was fine. 3 months later, during Q4, when every retail client we had needed maximum throughput, we ran into exactly the capacity constraints I'd flagged. We missed delivery windows. We got chargebacks. One client, a mid-size furniture distributor we'd had for 6 years, put us on a service improvement plan, which in that industry is 1 step before termination. I spent 11 days during my own Thanksgiving break fixing it. Nobody asked me to. I did it because I couldn't watch 6 years of that relationship collapse without trying. I did it because 40-some people on my team depended on that contract. I did it because that's who I was, and I'm not sure if that makes me admirable or just stubborn. What I know is that when January came and my boss held a leadership meeting to recap the quarter, the son-in-law presented the Q4 recovery as evidence of the team's resilience. There was a slide, it had a graph. My name was not on the slide. That was when I went home and finished the resignation letter. I didn't send it immediately. I spent a week going back and forth with myself, running numbers, talking to a financial advisor I trusted, updating a resume I hadn't touched in over a decade. My wife and I had long conversations at the kitchen table after the kids were in bed. She was calm and practical in the way that she always is when I'm the one falling apart. She laid out what we had, what we needed, what the realistic runway looked like if I left without something lined up. We were okay. Not comfortable forever okay, but real okay. We'd saved well. She had her own income. We had time. I started quietly reaching out to my network. I didn't blast anything on LinkedIn. I called people. Former clients, industry contacts, a few peers who'd moved to other firms over the years. Within 3 weeks, I had 2 conversations going that felt serious. I kept showing up at Meridian every day and doing my job at full capacity because that's what the job required and because I wasn't going to let the situation make me someone I wasn't. My boss called me into his office in the middle of February. He said he'd noticed I seemed disengaged. He asked me what was going on. I told him I'd been doing a lot of thinking about my future. He leaned forward. He said, "Owen, tell me what it would take. If it's the title, we can talk about that. If it's compensation, we can make something work." I sat there and I thought about the email I'd found out in. I thought about the shoulder pat and nothing changes for you. I thought about the carrier contract and the slide that didn't have my name on it. I thought about 11 days of Thanksgiving break. I said, I don't think it's about that anymore. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "What does that mean?" I said, "I think I've known for a while that this chapter is done. I wanted to be honest with you about that, and I wanted to do this right." I put the letter on his desk. He read it. He looked up. He said some things about legacy, about loyalty, about everything we'd built together. He wasn't wrong that we'd built something, but the building had happened a long time ago, and somewhere along the way, I'd become maintenance staff in my own house. I gave 4 weeks' notice because that's the professional standard, and because I had too much institutional knowledge to just disappear on a team that had nothing to do with the decisions that had been made above them. I spent those 4 weeks documenting everything, training people, making sure nothing fell apart on my way out. My team threw me a small going-away lunch in the conference room. A few of them got emotional. One of the guys who'd been with me for 11 years hugged me in the parking lot afterward and said, "This place is going to feel different." I thanked him. I meant it. I had an offer in hand before my last day. Regional VP of Operations at a supply chain consultancy based out of Indianapolis, doing exactly what I'd always done but for multiple client companies instead of one. More scope, better equity structure, and frankly, a team that had sought me out specifically because of what I built at Meridian, which is the kind of thing that tells you something about the difference between how a place sees you and what you're actually worth. I want to be honest about what the first few months were like, because the version of this story where everything is immediately better is not quite true. I had to relearn how to exist without the thing I'd organized 17 years around. I had to sit with the anger some evenings, process the grief, and yes, it was grief, even if people might roll their eyes at calling it that. Leaving a company you helped build feels like a loss, even when leaving is the right thing. But I also want to tell you what I heard. Starting about 4 months after I left, the furniture distributor I'd saved in Q4 terminated their contract. They found a new logistics partner. 6 years gone. The son-in-law had led the renewal negotiation. Word I got back through a mutual contact was that it did not go well. 2 of my former senior team members left within the first 6 months. They didn't leave because of me, at least not directly. They left because the environment had changed, because the person who knew them and advocated for them was no longer there, because institutional knowledge started walking out the door at a rate that creates operational chaos. My boss called me in June. I was surprised to see his name on my phone. I answered not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. He said things weren't going well. He said he thought he might have moved too fast. He said, and here I had to be very careful with my reaction. He said he wondered if I'd be interested in coming back at the right compensation level with the right title this time. I thanked him for calling. I told him I was settled and happy where I was. I told him I genuinely hoped things stabilized for the company and for the people still there because I meant it. Those 400-some employees hadn't done anything wrong. I hoped Meridian would be okay for their sake. He thanked me and we said goodbye, and I have not heard from him since. I do not regret a single part of how I handled this. Not the 4 weeks' notice, not the patience I exercised when I was angry, not the decision to leave rather than negotiate from a place of injury. I'm not someone who thinks employers are villains by default. My boss made a decision that was about his family and his legacy, and I understand that impulse even when it cost me. But understanding it doesn't mean I had to stay inside it. What I know now, at the other end of this, is what I probably knew already but hadn't had to prove to myself yet. Your value exists independently of the place where you spend your time. Meridian needed me to believe that the company and my worth were the same thing. For 17 years, I let those 2 things blur together. Walking out the door forced me to separate them, and when they came apart, I found out that what was mine had always been mine. My daughter called me last month. She's a senior now. She said one of her professors had given the class an assignment about professional integrity, and she told a version of my story, anonymized, as her example. I asked her what point she'd made. She said that sometimes the right move looks like losing until it doesn't. She's 21 and she's already smarter than I was at 40. I'm doing fine. More than fine. I'm working on something I'm proud of, with people who asked me to be there, in an environment where my name is on the things I do. That's not everything, but it's a lot. It's more than I had at the end, and that's enough. There's something I've thought about a lot since leaving Meridian, and it took me a while to find the right words for it. What happened to me wasn't just a business decision that went sideways. It was a lesson in cause and effect, the kind that plays out slowly, over years, and then all at once. When my boss handed his son-in-law the COO role, he wasn't just making a staffing choice. He was making a bet that loyalty to blood could substitute for 17 years of earned knowledge. That bet has a cost. It always does. The furniture distributor didn't leave because of bad luck. The carrier contract didn't fall apart by accident. Those were consequences, direct, logical, traceable back to a single decision made for the wrong reasons. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because it's simply true, and understanding it helped me stop feeling like a victim of something random. What I kept coming back to was this. I had always known the right thing to do. I knew when to escalate the carrier contract issue. I knew the Q4 risk months before it materialized. I knew, sitting in that office with the resignation letter on the desk, that no title or salary number was going to fix what had actually broken. That kind of knowing, being honest with yourself about what you see, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you, is something I think people underestimate. It's not intelligence in the abstract. It's the willingness to act on what you actually understand, rather than on what you wish were true. My boss had the same information I had. He just chose not to look at it clearly. And then there's the question of how I left. I've had people ask me why I gave 4 weeks, why I documented everything, why I helped fix Q4 at all when I was already halfway out the door. The honest answer is that I wasn't doing those things for my boss or for his son-in-law. I was doing them for the 40 people on my team who showed up every day and had nothing to do with the politics above them. Integrity isn't something you practice only when it's easy or when someone's watching. You find out what you're actually made of in the moments when walking away would be simpler than staying to do it right. That's the part my daughter understood when she told her professor my story. Not the quitting, the how of the quitting. There's a version of this where I make a scene, where I sabotage the transition, where I let the resentment do the talking. I'd seen that version play out for other people. It feels good for about a week, and then it follows you. What I know now is that the 17 years I gave to Meridian were real and they were mine, and no one could take the substance of them when I walked out. The relationships I built, the problems I solved, the judgment I developed, those came with me. That's what the new role recognized. That's what my daughter quoted in her paper. That's what my boss was calling about in June, though by then it was too late. You don't control what other people decide. You don't always get the credit you've earned, and the timeline of fairness is rarely as clean as you'd like. What you do control is the standard you hold yourself to when the system around you stops holding it for you. That's not a small thing. Over time, it turns out to be the only thing that actually compounds.